Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. It's Politics Week. In the second half of our show, we'll be joined by Dr. Walter Williams, noted black economist, author, syndicated columnist, and professor at George Mason University, to discuss the tremendous loyalty that black voters have to the policies and party that he believes are doing them the most harm. Up first, we welcome Tom Bevan, co-founder and executive editor of RealClearPolitics, to dissect the lessons of the midterm elections. Tom, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Bill.
Tom, the midterms are behind us. The federal government is now in full lame duck mode. With the Republicans looking to take over in January, is it the Democrats' turn to become the party of no?
I think it is. I think that's what you're going to see as Republicans, with their expanded majorities in the House and obviously now taking control of the Senate, are going to seek to move legislation through. I think Democrats will be, particularly in the Senate, are going to be relying on the filibuster to try and prevent the GOP from pushing much of their agenda through. And the pieces that do get through will go to the president's desk and might well get vetoed. So I think they will turn into being the party of no. And that's the traditional role of the minority party. And sometimes parties take knocks for that, but that's the way the government's designed to run, and that's, I'm sure, how the role that the Democrats are going to assume.
Well, they used to call it checks and balances, but they don't call it that anymore. They call it gridlock.
They call it gridlock, and they call it dysfunction. And I think there is I think the government has become a little bit dysfunctional, and there's plenty of blame to go around. I think one of the reasons for that does land on the shoulders of the president and his either unwillingness or inability to find common ground and negotiate to do those deals. Now, I think both sides see opportunity in the new Congress to find common ground, and so we'll have to see, whether they're able to do that and on which issues they're able to do that. But certainly, I think one of the messages from the midterms that voters sent in early November was that, look, they're frustrated with the way the government's been functioning or not functioning, and I think they want to see it move in a different direction.
Well, what's going to keep both parties from just starting the 2016 presidential campaign and spending their time scoring points instead of getting any business done?
Well, certainly the 2016 campaign has been going on and is now going to be in full bloom as we get into the new year, and a lot of these folks have said they're going to start making announcements. So there's no getting around the fact that 2016 presidential politics are going to be in play, especially when you have folks like Ted Cruz, Rand Paul in the Senate who are looking to position themselves. That being said, I do think most Republicans say and think that they need to be able to show that they can govern, are willing and able to govern. And they're going to have to do that in a way, though, I think, by picking and choosing legislation and moving legislation that doesn't alienate the Republican base. And so that will be an interesting tightrope for them to walk. And I think, conversely, you're going to see folks like Hillary Clinton, and whoever else might run on the Democratic side. They're going to have their own set of issues, not necessarily related to legislation, but certainly, Hillary is going to want to, she's not going to want to run for President Obama's third term, but she will also have to do so in a way that doesn't alienate the president's coalition that reelected him twice. And so that'll be an interesting tightrope walk for her as well.
If there's a core in both parties that are looking for compromise, does that mean that logrolling and earmarks are likely to come back?
That's a good question. I don't know about that. I do think in one sense, there was this great Tea Party uprising of 2010. It was, I think, largely, I don't want to say that it was an uprising that was put down. I think a lot of what the Tea Party subsumed might be the better word, and incorporated, because I do think a lot of the Tea Party's energy and focus on fiscal issues, on things like government waste and earmarks in particular, really did become sort of the mainstream thinking of the party. So I don't know that we're going to necessarily see a resurgence of earmarks. I think those are still probably considered, I don't want to say taboo, but I don't think that constituents are necessarily looking favorably upon the resurgence of earmarks. What we'll have to find out is whether someone like a Mitch McConnell, who is going to have to do a certain amount of horse trading to get some legislation passed, whether that's a tool that he decides to go back into the toolbox for, or he can do without it.
Right. Sometimes they need lubricant to get some of these things done.
Absolutely.
So I guess the Republican leadership took some lessons from the insurgency of the Tea Party. What lessons has the Democratic leadership taken from their beating at the polls? Can we expect some kind of corrections out of them?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. I mean, you have certainly President Obama did not take that lesson from the election. I mean, he came right back with a statement on the FCC. He went overseas and did a climate deal with China. He's moving forward with executive action on immigration. So this is not a situation where the president appears to have taken a lesson from the election that he needs to sort of moderate. And you've seen that also from Democrats. I mean, you see this from both sides, right? Mm-hmm. Progressives think the problem they had with the last election is that they weren't progressive enough. They were not liberal enough. They did not offer enough of a quote unquote, change as opposed to an echo, and that's why they lost. So, and that's typically what the base takes away from the party. That's what the Republican base thinks happened at the presidential level in 2008 and 2012. They didn't nominate presidential candidates that were conservative enough.
Nobody wants to think they lost on the fundamentals. They want to think there's some other reason that caused them to lose.
So I do think, though, that, again, sort of more sober-minded analysis from the Democratic side didn't just dismiss this as saying, oh, look, it's we just didn't turn out our base. I think the analysis that I've read and seen, there are Democrats, including Jim Messina, who ran President Obama's campaign, who looked at the data and said, look, we do have a problem with working-class white voters in this country, and we need to make sure that we're paying attention and try and recapture some of those, because without them, suddenly the great Democratic coalition doesn't look so great anymore.
Who's the standard bearer for that? I mean, what do you make of Harry Reid's elevation of Elizabeth Warren to some kind of newly created leadership position?
Well, Elizabeth Warren is an interesting case, right? She's sort of your classic, Northeastern liberal, Harvard professor profile, and yet, she traveled around the country. She was going places where Barack Obama could not go. She went to Kentucky. She went to Colorado. She went all over the country and really did excite Democrats with this populist message about, look, the system is rigged against you and rigged against middle-class folks, and we have to make sure that we're allowing students to be able to pay back their loans, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's an interesting mix. I mean, I think Republicans, at least some Republicans, have also recognized that they need to be, I think, paying attention to middle-class concerns as well. So there is this populist sentiment, and it's going to be represented, on the liberal side by Elizabeth Warren right now. And we'll see who emerges on the Republican side to be sort of the biggest champion of that. But I think there's definitely a populist element that's coursing through the electorate that cannot be ignored by either side. And
if Hillary really is the chosen one, how's she going to deal with that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, look, so far she hasn't done a very good job. I mean, with the rollout of her book, she made a number of really unforced errors, tone-deaf, tin-eared type comments about being dead broke, et cetera, et cetera. I suspect she'll learn from that and she'll hone her message, and she will try and present herself as a champion of the middle class and the working class. Now, the question is whether, and this is the thing about voters, I think voters, when they look at folks, they're pretty savvy about figuring out whether the rhetoric is real or not.
They can spot phonies usually, but sometimes they like phonies.
That's the thing. Voters want authenticity. Even if they don't necessarily agree with someone, if they feel like they're being authentic and shooting straight with them, they can tolerate that and in many ways embrace that. Hillary may get the rhetoric right, but the question is whether she can actually make that connection with these voters, and that remains to be seen.
Can she manufacture enough authenticity in time?
That's a good way of putting it, Bill.
So, Tom, let's talk Jonathan Gruber for a bit. The MIT economics professor, once described as the key architect of both Obamacare and Romneycare. Has the firestorm set off by his videos describing how stupid American voters were bamboozled into supporting Obamacare done any lasting damage to the ability of unaccountable elites to run the country?
The interesting thing about this is I'm not sure how much of this is really news. It's news in one sense that it's a confession, it's an admission that that the language was tortured on purpose to sort of try and obfuscate and obscure some of the things that were going on in the law. But, we kind of already knew that.
Yeah.
The president has admitted to that with the, if you like your doctrine, you can keep it. If you like your plan, you can keep it. So it's just another sort of, data point that reinforces, certainly for critics who look at this law, that it was sort of sold on a mountain of lies, if you will.
But people don't like their noses being rubbed in it. It's not just a matter of course, politicians lie. It's then bragging about it that gets people upset.
I agree with that. And this is an example of him being caught doing that. Look, I also think voters, they don't like to be told that they're stupid, because I think generally speaking, they're not. The administration has been caught, I think, a few times, obscuring things and in some ways insulting voters. I mean, this whole idea, when Nancy Pelosi came out and said, well, I don't even know who Jonathan Gruber is.
Right.
It took about 2 seconds on Google to find out that she was,
lying.
had cited him. The White House has cited Gruber 71 times, apparently, in emails promoting, the passage of the law. And President Obama stands there and says, look, this was just some guy. It sounds very similar to his phraseology in the IRS scandal, where he said, well, this is just two Dilberts in Cincinnati. It's and that kind of stuff. Or, if you want to go back even further, well, this is just about an internet video. This isn't about, a terrorist attack. I mean,
it seems to work.
You get these sort of things which the administration says, and voters kind of look at that and think, how dumb do they think we are? And I think that certainly doesn't help the administration's case. I don't know that it alters the equation. I mean, look, for Obamacare, the big kahuna is a Supreme Court case.
Mm-hmm.
That could substantially
change the game,
alter the trajectory of this law, whether it succeeds or fails ultimately, and how Republicans may attack it legislatively. I don't think the Jonathan Gruber thing really alters any of that. The folks who are against the law are still against the law.
Mm-hmm.
Folks who are in favor of the law look at what Gruber said and say, look, this is much ado about nothing.
Tom, the libertarians seem to be making a lot of noise lately. A growing number of them believe they have a shot at slowly taking over the Republican Party, maybe in a decade or so. Are they fooling themselves?
My crystal ball on that's a little cloudy, Bill, but I will say, you look at the younger generation, and you look at their approach to social issues like gay marriage and other issues, and I think you can see where libertarians believe that there's a sort of coming resurgence, possibility for a coming resurgence.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I'm not exactly sure. I think when the Republican Party has been strongest, it has always, I think, had a libertarian strain. I mean, Grover Norquist likes to say it's the leave me alone coalition, whether you believe it's guns or whatever your issue might be. It's just taxes or whatever. It's
back to Barry Goldwater.
Yeah, it's just, keep the government out of my business, let me do my own thing. And that's a distinctly libertarian philosophical viewpoint. I don't know if that means that, suddenly Rand Paul is going to be the standard bearer. I think there are still very significant forces within the Republican Party that are, and we've even seen those in reaction to Rand Paul, that assert themselves at the idea of a sort of a full-blown libertarian standard bearer. And that usually manifests itself mostly on national security policy, but certainly in other areas as well. And so I think the jury is still out on whether there will be this full-blown libertarian resurgence, or whether libertarianism just remains an important part of the sort of broader Republican coalition.
If the neocons and the hard Christian right get together to block Rand Paul, does that mean that we're going to have another Bush in the race?
Well, I think we're going to have another Bush in the race
anyway.
If you listen to the tea leaves that are being read by his son, George P., and also by his brother, Bush 43, just said in an interview recently that he thinks Jeb's going to do it. All signs are pointing in that direction. So we may end up with another Bush running for the White House regardless. But yeah, I do think there was this sort of libertarian flair when Rand Paul got up and gave his filibuster on drones and was talking about sort of pulling back from our military adventurism around the world. That resonated with a much broader swath of the Republican electorate than I think most people recognized at the time, among young people, but also among, even sort of more traditional folks who would call themselves, national security type Republicans in the heartland, who were kind of questioning exactly what the heck we were doing, continuing, to be in losing lives and blood and treasure in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, events have a way of intervening, and I think the pendulum has sort of swung back in the other direction. But I still think there's a pretty vigorous debate going on within the Republican Party, and we will see that play out during the 2016 primaries.
Tom, the media landscape is changing. It changes every day. You and the RealClearPolitics family are all a part of that. How do you see these changes continuing between now and the 2016 election?
Well, that's a good question, Bill. I mean, it's one of those things. A few years ago, we didn't have Twitter. A couple of years before that, there was no YouTube. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how quickly the digital media landscape has changed and been really become integral parts of not only the media coverage from a reporting standpoint, but also from a campaign standpoint, how the campaigns have utilized these tools to really revolutionize how they go about reaching out and targeting voters.
Well, plus every old political lie now comes back to haunt you on YouTube. That's going to change things.
Sure. But, I mean, the politicians are already savvy to that. Everybody's got trackers following them around everywhere all the time. And I think that's one of the reasons you've seen campaigns that have become even more conservative debates now. Even little town hall meetings become these real sort of stale. I mean, there are very few unguarded moments on the campaign trail, and even the private moments now are no longer private. Everybody knows that after, Mitt Romney's 47% and some of these other things that have come out. And I think that's probably, you could look at that and say, well, that's a good thing that now that there's, more transparency, but I think it might actually be the opposite, which is it has caused, we talked about authenticity earlier, and it has caused candidates and consultants who are in these folks' ear day in and day out to put another sheen, another layer of inauthenticity over the top.
Overly managing.
So they're conservative, they are pre-programmed and ultra-disciplined in what they say and do, and there just aren't any of these sort of, or very, the unguarded, spontaneous moments that really sort of give you a peek at who these people are as individuals are fewer and further between, and I think that's probably not a good thing.
In the midst of all this ferment, we look back at the legacy media, some people call the mainstream media. They always seem a couple of days behind. Their objectivity is in question, and their business models are falling apart. Certainly the large advertiser-based newspaper business model is falling apart. Where are they heading?
I don't know that we know the answer to that either. I mean, I think we have seen some new web-only publications. I mean, we were sort of the first web-only publication to come on board so many years ago, but we've seen folks trying out different models and working to really solve that equation. I don't think anybody's got the answer. I think even the legacy media folks, some have done a better job of adapting than others, certainly, but I think by and large, everybody's sort of swimming along this fast-flowing river and trying to keep their heads above water and figure it out. And I think it will work itself out. And in many ways, I think the media is better. I mean, there's
more of it.
From a consumer standpoint, there's more of it. That is both good and bad. I think it's contributed to partisans living in their own echo chambers. You've got a whole new generation of folks now who don't even, not only do they don't read hard copies of anything, they don't even go to websites anymore. It all comes to them via social media. It's pushed to them via friends. It's recommended. So there's there are myriad number of very complicated issues about not only the production of journalism but the consumption and all that. But I do think there's some good stuff out there every day. Now you got to search around to find it, but there's some great reporting that's being done by political journalists all across the country, and that's one of the things that we try and do at RealClearPolitics, and why I think our promise of being sort of a trusted filter is more important than ever, because we're out there sifting through this stuff every single day, trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, and it's become a 24/7, 365-day-a-year job.
Yeah. Well, RealClearPolitics just celebrated its 14th birthday. Have you and co-founder John McIntyre accomplished what you set out to achieve?
Oh yeah, I think we've accomplished more than we ever thought we could or would achieve, in the sense that our story is sort of in some ways a cliche, classic story of two guys with an idea. I mean, back in the late 90s, we were political junkies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, John was a trader. I was in advertising, so we weren't involved in journalism or politics professionally. We were just junkies who had a passion for this stuff and followed it closely and had the idea. As some of these bigger news outlets were coming online, I always tell people it was the first time you could read what was being written in the LA Times and the New York Times on the same day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of the genesis of the idea. Why don't we bring all this stuff together in one place for people like us who love this stuff and really follow it with a passion? And obviously the election piece of it and the poll averages have been a big
mm-hmm.
part of our success and our growth over time. But that was really, what we were about. And we thought it sounded like a good idea, but we didn't really, we didn't realize that it would become what it has become.
And how it's going to grow and all the different sections. And it's my go-to every morning, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's really gratifying. And I always tell people come up to me, all the time and say, oh, I love RealClearPolitics, or I love any of the RealClear
mm-hmm.
sites, and it's one of my favorite sites. It's my first site that I go to, and I never get tired of hearing that. I'm always very flattered by it. In fact, I was just at an event, the Reagan National Defense Forum, earlier this month, and John McCain was one of the honorees, and I've met Senator McCain a couple of times, but he doesn't know me,
mm-hmm.
so I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, how you doing? Yeah, great, RealClearPolitics." He said, "I love RealClearPolitics." He pulls out his iPhone and pulls up our app.
No kidding.
He says, "See, yeah," and it was funny because his wife, Cindy McCain, was standing there, and she just kind of rolled her eyes, and she said it's the first thing he looks at every morning. He's like, "I can't get enough of the polls." And so it was just and those kind of moments really make me reflect on 14 years, which, in internet years is like
right.
3 times dog years.
Yeah, several lifetimes.
And yet it just feels like yesterday that we were sort of starting out as just two guys and an idea and working at it day in and day out. We've accomplished more than we thought, at least speaking for myself, more than I thought we would. And it's been a very gratifying and fun journey that we've been on.
Tom, it's been a nice romp across the political landscape. Thanks for being on the show.
You bet, Bill. Thank you.
That was Tom Bevan, co-founder and executive editor of RealClearPolitics, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. To send us comments and feedback on this or any of our past shows, visit realclearradio.org and click on the email Bill link. Real Clear Radio Hour is proudly presented in partnership with RealClearPolitics, one of America's top political websites. Ahead, noted economist and commentator Dr. Walter Williams dives into the issue of race and politics. Stay tuned.